This PowerPoint is going to give you a brief introduction to the third and fourth conjugations and personal pronouns, the major grammar in Chapter 8. Now, the third and fourth conjugations are nothing to be scared of. They're exactly the same as the first and second, if you remember your cardinal rules. Cardinal rule number 1, of course, base plus endings, base plus endings. And how do you find the base of a verb? The same way you do for all verbs. You look at the second principal part, cut off the RE, and you are left with your base. For the first conjugation, the infinitive ending is long ARE. For the second conjugation, the infinitive ending is a long ERE. And for the third, what you have for the infinitive ending is a short ERE. So if you remove the RE, which is the infinitive ending from these, you are given your base. So for the third conjugation, your base will be a short E. Once you have found the base, of course, you simply need to add the present active indicative endings, OST, mus, tis, unt. And in this chapter, we're really only worried about the present indicative active. We'll talk about the future and the imperfect of the third and fourth conjugation later. If you know your endings and you know how to find the stem of a verb, you can conjugate a third conjugation or fourth conjugation verb. You will use the same steps and the same process as you did for the first and second conjugation. For example, the verb duco, ducere, duxi, ductus, to lead. You see on the left the base, duce, and then the endings in the second column, ost, mus, tis, unt. Simply adding the endings to the base is conjugation. Now, if you look at the conjugated forms on the right, you'll see duco, as we might expect when a long O is attached to a short ending on a base. The O eats the vowel, and you end up, instead of dukeo, you end up with duco. Remember, if the form was dukeo, this would be a second conjugation verb. The interesting thing happens in the other forms, where you can see that that short E becomes a short I. This is what happens in the third conjugation. If you'd like an easy way to remember it, the way I learned it, the way I helped myself remember it, was that first conjugations use an A, which is the first letter, the first vowel of the alphabet. Second conjugations use an E, which is the second vowel of the alphabet. And the third conjugation uses an I, which is the third vowel of the alphabet. So instead of dukeo, dukes, duket, you get duco, dukis, dukit, ducimus, ducitus, ducunt. Now you see that U in the third plural, you might expect that if you remember back to the future of the second and first conjugations. Instead of, for example, habe bint, you ended up with habe bunt. Same rules here. All third conjugations will conjugate like duco in the present indicative active. Facio represents a different class of third conjugation verbs, ones that are distinguished by a certain vowel but conjugate the same way. You'll notice the first principal part, facio, looks a little bit different than duco in that there's a short I, but the infinitive is still ere, facere, and you can see here ducere. These are called third IO verbs. They're a class of verbs that simply keep a short I in the nominative, the first person singular present indicative active, and in the third plural present indicative active. And you can see the I is highlighted here. It sticks around. Facio, facus, facit, facimus, facitus, faciunt. The I sticks around. In the second plural, in this first plural, second singular, and third singular, you'll notice that it looks exactly like duco if I switch back. Ducus, ducit, ducimus, ducitus, facus, facit, facimus, facitus. The keys to look at the second principal part for these verbs, where you'll see that short ERE ending, which indicates that this is a third conjugation verb. The imperatives of the third conjugation present no problem. If you remember back to the rules for the first and second conjugation, you simply cut off the infinitive ending and you're left with the second singular imperative, as you would do with, for example, mitto, mittere, cut off the RE and you're left with mitte, second singular imperative, send. And just as we did with the first and second conjugations, you'll add a TE to the base in order to get the second plural imperative. But, as you might expect with the third conjugation, you'll notice that instead of mitete, you get mitite, where that E becomes an I. There are 4 strangenesses in the third conjugation with the imperatives, and those are with the verbs dico, duco, facio, and fero, where the second singular imperative actually ends in a consonant, not a vowel. Dico becomes deek, say, duco becomes duke, facio, fac, fero, fair. And the sort of mnemonic that you can see in your book on page 70 Deek, Duke, Fack, and Fair should have an E, but it isn't there. That's a good way to remember these. Now remember again, when you're going Latin to English, these will already be done for you. These will become more important when composing Latin from English. And with these, though, however, you'll notice the second plural, dicite, ducite, facite, and ferite, follow the rules for all third conjugation verbs. Conjugation rules for the fourth conjugation, you can imagine, are going to be the same. Cardinal rule number 1, base plus endings. You find your base by going to the second principal part, the infinitive, cutting off the RE, and you're left with, in the fourth conjugation, not ARE, because that's the first, the second with ERE, the third with short ERE, and the fourth conjugation uses a long I, IRE, ire. Go to the second principal part, cut off the RE, you're left with your base. Take your personal endings, add them to that base, and you have a conjugation, the present active indicative conjugation. Let's see this in practice. Let's use the verb venio, venire, veni, venturus, meaning to come. You can see on the left, in the first column, the stem, venire. If you cut off the RE, you're left with vena. Then you simply add your personal endings, and oh look, you don't have to change anything. They stick around. Venio, venus, venit, venemus, venitus, and then in the third, that I comes back. But again, the I stays, the U comes back. If you remember the future of the first and second conjugation, habebunt instead of habebent. And as we saw with the third IOs, with, for example, facio, instead of facint, you get faciunt. This is related to the oral nature of the development of Latin, and the easiest way to remember this is simply remember that it's there. There's no hard and fast rule that I can give you to help you remember that. Imperatives of fourth conjugation verbs are exactly as you would expect. You cut off the infinitive ending, and the stem is actually your second singular imperative. You add a TE to that, and you have your second plural imperative. Veni, venite, dormi, dormite, audi, audite. And if you are fans of Christmas carols in the original Latin, O Come All Ye Faithful, the Latin title is Venite. Actually, it's not the line, sorry, O Come Let Us Adorm is Venite Adoramus when you're singing the Latin version of the Christmas carol. That's the third and fourth conjugation in the present indicative active. If you know your rules and you know your endings, these present no difficulty. It's simply a different class of verb. In the present indicative active, the rules are the same. Base plus endings using the same endings. In exercise 57, which you'll be completing for your homework, you'll see that, you are asked to identify the following verb forms by person, number, and mood, either indicative or imperative, and translating into English. I've got the first 6 up here, and I'm not going to translate them because you can look those up yourself, but just to go through and make sure that you understand what these verbs look like. The first one, scribit, immediately looking at that, you might think it's a future verb because you see the BIT, which we saw in the first and second conjugation. This is where your vocabulary becomes exceptionally important because scribit is actually third singular present indicative active of the verb scribo, scribere. Number 2, sedent, from the second conjugation verb sedeo, third plural present active indicative. Notice you have a base plus the NT ending. Agunt, from ago agere, is third plural present indicative active. Faciunt, which we just saw in the example verb, third plural present indicative active. Rege, notice there's no personal ending, it must be an imperative, and in fact it is. It's the second singular imperative of rego. And mittimus, again, if you know your endings, these verb forms present no problems. Mus, first person plural. Mitto, third conjugation verb, so the stem is mitte, first plural present indicative active. And you'll complete the rest of exercise 57 for your homework for Monday. The other major grammar bit in chapter 8 is introducing the last of the personal pronouns. You've already learned the first and second personal pronouns, ego, tu, nos, and vos. What you have in chapter 8 on page 71 is the last of the personal pronouns, the third person pronoun. Pronouns, again, are used in place of a noun, from pro and nomen. They are words that replace or substitute for a noun. This is a little bit of review. Personal pronouns replace a proper noun, as you might imagine. And the pronouns decline, especially the third person one. All 5 cases we've been playing with, they have singular and plural. First and second person only for ego, tu, nos, and vos. And in those, for ego, tu, nos, and vos, the nominatives are used only for emphasis for the simple reason that the verb form has the person in it. With is, ea, id, which is he, she, it, or they, if you look at the declension of it on page 71, it should look fairly familiar. Notice the endings. In the singulars, which are presented at the top of that chart, is, ea, id, eos, 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 ei, eom, eam, id, eo, ea, eo, you've got a combination of first, second, and third declension endings. The ablative looks exactly like we would expect from the first and second declension, as does the accusative, but the genitive and the dative look like third declensions. In the plural, however, you'll notice that this pronoun declines exactly like every other adjective we've seen so far. Magnus a noster, nostra, nostrum, any of those adjectives which use first and second declension endings, they use it. Ei, ai, ea, notice the short a for the neuter plural. Eorum, 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 eis, 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 eos, eas, ea, eis, eis, eis. Dative and ablative plural using the long is ending we'd expect. The base to this is an e. You'll notice that except for the nominative singular, where you have is and id, the base is an e, and then cardinal rule number 1, base plus endings, you simply add the endings for the different declensions and the different cases and numbers to that e. The case uses are the same for other nouns and pronouns. Just because this is a pronoun or this is a strange-looking pronoun does not mean that the case uses change. You use the datives, the genitives, the nominatives, the accusatives, and the ablatives exactly the same way you would for other nouns. We'll be practicing these in our exercises both for Monday and for next Wednesday. Pronouns, again, not scary, but this pronoun in particular is used exceptionally often. It is very, very important that you commit this to memory as soon as possible because you will be seeing the third person pronoun pretty much everywhere.